Hello and welcome to the Hollywood Experience. I'm Adrian Paul, and on the other end of the line, I have
David Bethke.
in an undisclosed location, as I normally talk.
I know.
I'm
in my giant sword experience room. I got the wall painted and everything.
Yeah, that's really nice of you. I got a blue one here with a little dog thing that says Hollywood Experience.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, listen, this week we're going to have a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at some of those action sequences that we talk about with somebody that I actually worked with on Highlander, and I forgot all about it at first until I saw his name, Lauro David Chartrand-DelValle. He's done a lot. He's a director now. He's known as a producer, a writer, a stunt performer. Done a lot of stuff. Was actually in The Last Samurai, believe it or not.
There you go.
Doing stunts. So I had a little chat with him about that as well. And so let's get to the interview and then we'll be right back. All right, good morning. This morning I've got another great guest for us this morning to talk a little bit about action stuff. When I first heard about our current guest, Lauro, he's got an Italian first name and almost like a French second name. Lauro, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm pretty mixed up, and I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, because I saw Chartrand-DelValle, and you said Chartrand-DelValle. It's interesting. But it is French origin, isn't it?
Well, my Chartrand is, but that was my stepfather adopted me, and my father is Mexican, DelValle, and Lauro was my uncle's name, my Mexican on my Mexican side. So it is very common in Italian, but it's also Spanish as well.
Spanish as well, yeah. There's a lot of similarities between the two. It's the way I can cheat when I speak Spanish because a lot of it's very similar. So I kind of put a lot of S's and stuff on it, and I get myself kind of understood when I speak Spanish. Do you speak?
Un poquito, very little.
Un poquito.
I've done a lot of movies in Latin American countries, Mexico, Panama, El Salvador, Colombia, stuff like that. So when I'm there, a certain amount comes back because my mother spoke and my father spoke, but I didn't learn because my two siblings were much older than me, 10 and 9 years older, and they didn't learn. So when it came time to teach me, I didn't want to learn. And then when it was time for me to want to learn, when I was interested, I had moved away from home and didn't have anybody to talk to. So it's always, I've been chasing it. And, when you're away from those countries and when you're not working there, you got nobody to talk to. So it disappears again. And then I go back and visit or do another movie there. And then in 2 weeks, I can talk my way into trouble and hopefully out of trouble. You know what I mean?
It's always the way, I think, and it's an old thing that many people have done, is they did it many times. There were a lot of immigrants who came to the United States and they spoke another language, whether it was Italian, Polish, whatever, and they didn't want their kids to speak that language because they wanted to integrate into that's such a shame because, there's so much culture and so much stuff you can learn from your past and from your heritage that, and
inevitably they're always wishing later, as I am, that you learned.
That you could do it. Yeah. Why didn't you teach me? You said you worked in a lot of Latin countries. Did you find it very different to work in those countries than you do in the US?
Yes. I guess one of the biggest things, it's like filming in the Wild West because there's not as many rules and regulations. So it's as a filmmaker, it can be a two-edged sword because safety wise, it's really tough sometimes. But as a filmmaker, a lot of times you can get things quicker and faster and in a different way that you can in the United States or in Canada when you're filming because of those regulations. So as a stunt coordinator and a action person, and when I'm directing and doing things like that, I have a sense of being careful enough, but also being able to stretch the boundaries a bit more because of the lack of limitations to some of those protocols there. But also, it's so different because of language barriers and translating things and stuff like that. So you got to be, as a filmmaker these days, you're always rushed. You never have enough time. So you got to rein it in all the time and slow down because they want to go and they want to help you. But you got to make sure everybody's clear on what's going on. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences, and you just have to grasp onto them and pay attention when you're there.
Do you think there's a lot? Do you think sometimes, because you and I both have worked for many years in this industry in different countries, and I've seen a lot of changes in the US structure under SAG and under a lot of the fight director rules. Do you think it's now gotten to the point where some of these rules are becoming very
stringent, so much more that it kind of almost ties your hands in some respect to do things. Whereas before you were able to, let's say, use somebody that wasn't union or something to actually do a very small thing. Whereas now you're restricted from doing certain things like that.
Yeah, it can be very limiting and much more difficult for sure to create what you're after and to put on the screen. And yeah, like you said, like if you want to hire somebody outside the union, that's really difficult these days. You know, it's always been a thing, but never to the point that it is now. And then with the safety standards, you know, getting more stringent around the world, it's a good thing. But you know, some of us in the stunt side of things figure like, are we ever going to do another stunt again because they consider it dangerous? Well, what we do is inherently dangerous. You know, that's why they call it stunts. But we do it as safely as possible, so it's repeatable, and we can come back to work again tomorrow. You know, so it's just like the safety people that come into our business don't understand our business because it doesn't make sense to them because we're doing dangerous things and they're trying to take the danger out of it. So it's a tug of war for sure.
When did you first start? When did you first get interested? I know you came from a martial arts background and, you know, you did many years in the martial art business, but what really kind of got you involved? I mean, you've been back since, gosh, way back. I mean, I'm looking at 1989 was the first stunt you basically did. So, so what kind of got you into the stunt world, obviously at a young age?
Well, actually, the martial arts and stunts kind of came together. I grew up on Chuck Norris movies, you know, and when I was 8 years old, I decided I want to be a stuntman. My mom took me to a Chuck Norris movie and I said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And she goes, what, like Chuck Norris, a movie star? And I go, no. The guy who's kicking through the window. And she goes, oh, you want to be a stuntman? Because she grew up in Los Angeles. She knew what a stuntman was. And she told me, and then everything I did, I bought books and read about stuntmen and tried to figure out what and how I could get there. And so eventually I got my foot on a set as an extra and got to meet the stunt coordinator and started chasing my dream. And in 1989, my first stunt was on MacGyver, a TV series in Vancouver.
Yeah, and you did a few things in Vancouver, didn't you? You did the Commish, you did Highlander.
With you, yes.
What stunts did you do on Highlander? I was always doing, I kept having my stunt guy kind of sit there sometimes. He's like, can I do something? And I'm like, well, I want to do
well, yeah, with you, of course. I would hate to be your stunt double. Daryl Sheeler was a guy that I actually introduced to the business in a roundabout way. So John Wardlow was the stunt coordinator on that show. And he called me one day and he said, hey, I know you can do gymnastics. Can you do a round off back handspring with a sword in your hand? And back in those days, there was no cell phones or anything like that. And everything moved a little bit slower. But anyway, I had a pager and I called him back and I said, oh, and then I thought, yeah, I can do a round off back handspring, but I've never done one with a sword in my hand. I better try this out. So I said, yeah, no problem. But Tony, I think, wants me on Thursday. Is that the day you're talking about? Yeah, Thursday. Well, let me call Tony back and check with him to see if he needs me Thursday or not for sure. And then I'll call you back. So I was lying through my teeth. I hung up. I ran down to the park with a sword. And I was practicing round off back handsprings. Of course, you got to do one hand with a fist and one hand with a palm. Yeah. And I nailed it. And I was like, okay, that's not so hard. I just had to check it out, right? Make sure the sword's pointing out away from the other hand and yada, yada, yada. Go back and call him. Yeah, Tony says I'm free. He doesn't need me on Thursday. So yeah, I'm good to go.
So the truth has finally come out, is it? Is that what you're telling me?
I mean, sometimes you got to just go train real quick and figure out some of these things to make
sure. Because you know, filmmakers or stunt coordinators come up with ideas sometimes, and sometimes it's based on the set or what the director wants. You know, they want this kind of, and you think, okay, what could I do? I could do this, but sometimes it's not actually been done before, like you said, with a sword in your hand, which actually does change the dynamics slightly, but it does have to be practiced.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. I mean, it's the great thing about stunts and why we love it so much. Your work day is never the same. You do something different every day. Although you may be doing a stunt that somewhat has been done before and a different twist on it. So exactly like what I just said, it's like, well, of course I've done round off back handspring before and backflip, but now I got to try it with a long sword in my hand. You know what I mean? So it's just slight differences can throw it off, like you said. And so you got to test it. You got to practice it. You got to rehearse it and figure it out. So yeah, sometimes you got to do it on your own. Sometimes
how many times did John bring you up? Were you in Seattle at the time, or were you in Vancouver still at the time?
No, I was in Vancouver. I had moved here, but in '89 I moved here. So I don't know. I must over the seasons worked a dozen times on Highlander. Right. Popped in and out. You know, played a bad guy. Doubled a couple of people. You know, I'm short, so I don't get to double too many people. But yeah, it was mostly bad guy and stuff like that.
Now I'm gonna ask you about a series that you were on that I always, because in this business it's a small business, whether you're doing stunts, whether you're doing film, and you hear little things coming backwards and forwards from different sets, especially at the time. Now you worked on Kung Fu, and I know Kung Fu had a few how can I put it, accidents or things that were not supposed to go the way they were supposed to go because of certain reasons. Were you involved in any of that? Was there any? Did you see any of that type of stuff?
I didn't see any accidents per se, but I saw some pretty interesting fight choreography that had to be changed because let's just say a certain amount of alcohol was already consumed and certain people couldn't do certain moves. So I'm short, and I remember once in a fight I had to get punched in the stomach so that I could bend over so I could get kicked in the face. That's how the choreography got worked out.
To put you in the right position for it, right?
So that, my face was knee height because that's as high as the leg could get that day, sort of thing. And so there was many stories like that, and it's sad, and it's not a good thing, but and that was the old Kung Fu. It's there's a new Kung Fu being filmed here in Vancouver now too. And,
yes, I heard.
That's a whole different story.
Yeah, that was the one back in the 1990s. That was
shot in Toronto.
And as I said, I was hearing it, and one of the things I was adamant about was never to hurt a stunt guy or hurt anybody. And I think I had probably about 3 accidents in all the hundreds of fights I did. And as you said, usually it's because of some small thing you didn't even think was necessary to do it. I mean, I actually saw Daryl Sheila one time take a car hit, and the car hit usually is a roll onto the windshield, onto the hood, onto the windshield, and over the back of the car. But his knee pads, or the pads he had on his shins, caught the bumper, and it literally flipped him, and he landed like a ton of rocks and didn't move, and we were all kind of held our breath for a couple of seconds until he got up and went, "Oh, I'm okay. What should we do it again?" But it's those small things that happen. Can you talk a little bit about that? Any incidents that happened with you that you wouldn't think of? Because I think it's always useful to hear from different.
Well, I've got.
I know there's probably a lot of them.
Well, no, the major one for me is I got shot in 1991 with a restrictor that blew out of a blank gun. So
okay, so talk about that. Talk about that first. Because a lot of people won't know what that means.
So when you have a repeating gun like a semi-automatic 9mm, when you're shooting it in film, you'll see the cartridges eject, the shell casings. The only reason they do that is because there's what's called a restrictor screwed in the end of your gun. So if your barrel is this big, you screw a fitting in there that's called a restrictor, and it's threaded, and it screws in the barrel, and it makes your barrel that big. The reason it does that is when you have a live gun and you have a bullet traveling down the barrel, there's back pressure that actually kicks the cartridge out of a real gun when it's firing bullets. So of course we don't shoot bullets in our blank guns. So you need something to cause that back pressure. So when you screw that fitting in there and it makes it smaller, there's still some of the flame escapes, but there's back pressure in the barrel to kick that empty cartridge out. So it makes the gun cycle is what it does.
Right.
Okay. So we use full load blanks, and they're quite powerful. Like you wouldn't put it to your skin or to your face. John Hexum killed himself by putting it to his temple.
Yes.
So they're very dangerous, and you don't point them at anybody. So on this set, they wanted to point the gun at me. They actually wanted to point it at my head from about 3 feet away, and everybody argued and said, "No, you can't do that. He'll burn his face. You may blow an eye out. You can't do that. These things are dangerous." So the decision was to basically, because I was doubling somebody that had to be put out of their misery, had to be killed. So the decision was, well, point it at his heart then, point it at his chest. So we did the shot, and flame came out and flash, and the director wasn't happy with it. He wanted more flash, and he didn't want to change his camera angle. So he insisted the gun be pointed at me, which is something that we, the stunt coordinator, it was weird. The stunt coordinator had been sent home. The armor had been sent home. So I was kind of left in the hands of the props guys who didn't really know how to work.
Oh, I've heard this type of story before. Go on, carry on.
Yeah.
That's how Brandon Lee died.
Oh, almost very, very similar. 2 years after mine, right? But I'm a stunt guy, so mine was kept pretty hush-hush. But anyway, back to the story. More flash. Got to see more flash. And so the props guys were getting screamed at, and they ran back to the truck, and they go, "What makes the flash?" Gunpowder. So they poured gunpowder down the barrel on top of a full load blank. So now what you're doing is filling the barrel full of powder, and you're making a pipe bomb, right? So it's either going to blow up in the actor's face, or what happened was it had so much pressure that it stripped the steel threads on that fitting and blew it right out of the gun like a bullet. And it went in my side here, through my stomach, intestine, and stopped in my liver.
Oh.
And I was super lucky because you got two main veins in your liver, and it stuck right between them. If it had, the doctor said, if it had cut one of those, I'd have bled to death before I got to the hospital. Anyway, I had 3 operations and 4 months of recovery, and then I was able to get back to work. And I tell you what, oddly enough, it was one of the best things for my career, because all of a sudden I was known as the guy who got shot. And if you can take a bullet, you can probably take anything. So we'll hire you.
I'm glad you got a happy disposition about it.
Not a technique I would recommend in getting known in the stunt business, but it definitely worked for me back in the day. And yeah, I was immediately known. So I got work after I healed up, and kept on going, fortunately. So,
but that kind of brings us back almost to what we talked about right at the beginning about the standards and the things you have to do now, because I mean, it's a little bit more strict today than it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And I think some of those things don't happen, I don't say at all, but as often, because those rules have been put into place.
Yeah. And fortunately, some of the things we've learned, we've been able to spread around the world to the film industry. Like, I've gone around the world, and I'm very adamant on my sets that nobody points a gun at anybody ever, even if it's a rubber gun.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Guys are like, it's just a rubber gun, and they're fooling around and twirling. I said, yeah, but you're building a habit right now. As soon as you get a gun with a blank in it, you're going to point it at people just the way you are doing with a rubber gun, because you think it's just a prop. It's a live ammunition. You can't do that.
Yeah, it's funny because when you talk about that, most of the time, first of all, when you have the camera and the camera's offset and you point towards the offset the actor, it looks like you're actually pointing at him, but you're actually pointing off of him based on where the camera's set. So there's no need to point at the actor.
No, it's just like right now. You can't tell that I'm not pointing my finger at my head. You know, I could fire this finger and you would think I'm shooting myself in the head, but I'm 6 inches in front of my face.
Right.
It's just the way the lens stacks it up. It's only 2-dimensional. So.
Right. So, I mean, you know, so those protocols that are now in place, and I think people don't understand that. I think that comes from people, and it still happens because everybody wants to get the best shot and the best and the best this and that, and they want more and they're bigger and they don't understand that there is a certain, there are movies and there's reality and you've got to kind of have a safety barrier in between those two.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Otherwise you start shooting snuff films, and that's not what we're here to do.
No, I know.
But one of the good things, I mean, especially in our business, stunt business, you know, we've always hated CGI because it kind of takes away some of our work. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of ways, it's made our work a lot safer and has expanded some work areas as well with all these Marvel movies. And we can do things now, start the stunt and then carry it on with CGI and finish the stunt. And so we're still working, we're still doing it. But one of the great things about CG is the gun flashes that they can put in now. So I can point the gun and look the camera directly down the gun at the barrel and see that I'm pointing right at the actor and just do a reaction. And now we put a flash in. Yeah. It's all safe and nobody gets hurt. You know what I mean? You can do it. I mean, got John Wick, bang, to the head all the time. You know what I mean?
Yes,
so,
right. Right. I mean,
people hate it because it doesn't look as real, but hey.
But I don't think the audience is really looking at that, to be honest. If they're watching what's going on, that flash is a millisecond of the frame. So I mean, oh my gosh, it didn't look as real. Well, yeah, but the actors say safe, and people are not really paying attention to that. Yeah. They're just looking at the entire action. If they're looking at that, they're looking at the wrong movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I totally agree with you. And it's interesting because, you know, with the special effects, you talk about special effects, the way movies are shot, and from your point of view as well, would be interesting to know. I mean, you see things like, you know, things like The Walking Dead or something. They'll shoot a zombie in the head, and then the head explodes, and you see that. Tell me a little bit of process like that, how a shot like that would be done, where you see an explosion right in front of you, where there's a person's their head explodes, for instance, or another one which seems to have it started about 10 years ago, where you actually see an actor walk across a street and get hit by a car, and it actually looks like the car smashed into them. So there's a technical element to that. So you want to address any of those two?
Sure. Well, the head blowing up thing, I mean, we used to put squib packs on the back of our heads and stuff like that and hide it under a wig and blow it out. And if it's not done correctly, you can get quite a severe concussion from the impact of the squibs on the back of your head. So that can be dangerous. And now with the CGI, we can blow the back of blow people's heads up easily, you know what I mean? But it all comes down to money and budget and stuff like that. So each episode of The Walking Dead or feature films has a certain budget for CGI, and it's at a certain point it runs out. So then you may go back to some practical work or augment it with a little bit of reality and a little bit of practical. So also we have air rigs now that special effects will run a tube up the back of your head under a wig, and it'll have blood loaded in it with some cottage cheese or whatever, and they'll just CG the dot. So this is the only CG they do with the entry wound, and then this all blows out the back. So there's various techniques and very many different ways to do it, and it just comes down to budget and what the director wants to see, what the look is, what the angle is. It all comes down to so many factors, and then you have to decide what's going to work for your film. Now with car hits, thankfully there's a lot of safety protocols now, because car hits are one of the most brutal stunts you can do, and they're so unpredictable, because once that car hits you, you are along for the ride. I don't care what kind of gymnast you are. You get tossed around in the air, you get hit, you get banged, you may hit your head on the car, which will disorientate you, and then trying to land out of that twirly, twisty, upside down hit is anybody's guess. And I've seen so many people not walk away from car hits, be carried away, and they have concussions and they lose their careers. And it's a gnarly stunt. So when you see somebody get hit by a car in a movie, I hope you really appreciate it, because they're selling out everything and taking all the risk. But nowadays we use wires, and we insist. I just went through this. I'm doing a car hit. I'm coordinating a car hit on a show that I'm doing right now next Wednesday. So I insisted that we do it in a